Chapter 8. The Calm Before the Storm. The interior of the Nova cruiser hummed with a low, resonant thrum, a constant reminder of the unyielding vastness outside its hull. Inside, the atmosphere was charged, a palpable tension knitting together the air as the crew prepared for the imminent Xanthor onslaught. In the heart of this controlled chaos, Luminara Zen stood apart, her gaze lost in the star-studded void beyond the viewing deck's translucent barrier. Lieutenant Don Carlos approached her quietly, his steps nearly silent against the soft hum of the ship. He stood beside her, following her gaze into the cosmos. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he remarked, his voice a gentle intrusion into the silence between them. "It's vast," Luminara replied, her voice tinged with a reverence that belied her usual stern demeanor. "It makes our conflicts seem insignificant, transient." Carlos nodded, his eyes still fixed on the stars. "Yet here we are, about to face a threat that could end countless lives. Makes you think about what we're fighting for, doesn't it?" Luminara turned to look at him, her celestial blue eyes meeting his. "It does, and it makes me wonder if we're really as different as we believe, or if it's just the boundaries we've constructed that define us." Carlos smiled slightly, appreciating her insight. "Maybe it's both. We're shaped by our experiences, but also by the walls we choose to build or break down." The conversation paused as they both returned their attention to the stars. It was a brief respite, a moment of peace before they would have to return to the reality of their situation. Finally, Carlos spoke again, this time his voice lower, almost hesitant. "Luminara, about tomorrow." She turned to face him fully, her expression serious. "We might not come back from this one, Carlos. I know the odds." "I know," he agreed, his voice firm. "But I wanted to say, whatever happens, I'm glad I got to know you. You've changed the way I see things." Luminara's face softened. It was rare for her to let down her guard, to allow her emotions to surface. But now, amidst the looming threat, she felt an unexpected surge of warmth. "I feel the same, Carlos. You've shown me a side of humanity I hadn't wanted to see before." They stood in silence again, letting the weight of their confessions hang between them. It was a silence filled with unspoken words, with fears and hopes mingling in the quiet. Finally, Luminara broke the silence. "We should get back. There's still much to prepare." Carlos nodded, but as they turned to leave, he reached out, placing a gentle hand on her arm. "Luminara, no matter what happens tomorrow, remember this." He paused, searching for the right words. "Remember that bridges can be built, even in the vastness of space, even between stars and souls." Luminara looked at him, a trace of a smile playing on her lips. "I'll remember," she promised. As they walked back to the heart of the ship, to the noise and the bustle and the preparation, the weight of their shared moment lingered, a beacon of something rare and precious, hope and connection in the face of the dark. The ship might have been speeding towards confrontation, but for Luminara the journey had already brought an unexpected discovery. A bridge across the starry expanse, connecting two vastly different beings with a common cause, and perhaps a burgeoning respect that might one day bloom into something more. The dim glow of the command deck flickered like the dying breath of a distant star, casting restless shadows across Luminara's determined features. Around her, screens pulsed with data, a symphony of silent warnings as the Nova cruiser sliced through the velvety blackness of space toward the looming conflict. Luminara stood, rigid yet poised, beside Lieutenant Don Carlos, who was issuing commands with a calm precision that belied the storm of adrenaline undoubtedly coursing through him. The crew's faces, a mosaic of species from different corners of the galaxy, were etched with concentration and a unifying resolve that transcended their diverse origins. As the cruiser approached the coordinates of the impending Xanthor invasion, Luminara's mind raced. The previous encounters with the Xanthor had exposed their brutal efficiency and lack of mercy, but also a predictability in their attack patterns that nagged at her like an unsolved riddle. She replayed the battles, frame by frame in her mind, searching for the anomaly, the weak link in their armor. "Here," she said suddenly, her voice slicing through the hum of the cruiser's operations. She tapped on the holo display, enlarging an overlay of the Xanthor fleet's formation. "Their flanks are reinforced, but look here." She pointed at a seemingly minor gap in the formation. "They leave the rear guard thinner every third rotation." Carlos leaned in, his brow furrowing as he considered the implications. "You think it's a habitual flaw, or a trap?" "It's habitual," Luminara responded, confidence threading her voice. "They're insectoids, reliant on a hive mind. They adapt, but slowly, methodically. This is our entry point." With a nod, Carlos turned to the communications officer. "Get me a direct line to all squadron leaders. We have a new entry point." As the orders were relayed, the mood in the command center shifted palpably from tense anticipation to a focused urgency. Luminara watched as the tactical team recalibrated the attack vectors, integrating her findings into a daring new strategy. The space outside began to populate with the glittering specks of Xanthor ships, arranging themselves into the familiar, deadly formation that had haunted her nightmares. But this time, she felt a surge of anticipation, rather than dread. "Prepare to engage on my mark," Carlos's voice boomed over the comm system. The cruiser vibrated slightly as it aligned for the attack. The silence that followed was pregnant with collective breaths held too long. Then, with a burst of thruster fire, the ship lunged forward. As they broke into the fray, the cruiser's cannons roared to life, spitting fire and light. Luminara felt each discharge reverberate through the deck, a fierce rhythm that matched the pounding in her chest. They were the spearhead, piercing through the heart of the Xanthor formation with a precision that turned their habitual oversight into a fatal flaw. The Xanthor, caught off guard, scrambled to reorient their forces. Their movements were chaotic, uncoordinated, as if the Nova cruiser's unexpected assault had disrupted their collective mind. Luminara manned a secondary control, her fingers dancing over the interfaces with practiced ease. Each command she issued adjusted the cruiser's trajectory, dodging incoming fire and exploiting every gap the enemy unwittingly offered. Beside her, Carlos directed the fleet with a leader's grace, his voice a steady drumbeat over the din of battle. Together they wove the cruiser and its allies through the disarrayed Xanthor ranks, a dance of destruction that was both terrifying and exhilarating. As the battle reached its crescendo with the Xanthor fleet breaking apart under the relentless assault, Luminara allowed herself a tight smile. The tide had turned, not just in the battle, but within herself. Where once there was doubt and fear, now there was only clarity and purpose. The cruiser sailed through the debris of the Xanthor fleet, a silent testament to the might and ingenuity of the galactic concordance. In the quiet that followed the storm, Luminara looked over at Carlos, who met her gaze with an approving nod. Together, they had not only devised a winning strategy, but had executed it flawlessly, changing the course of the war. As the last of the enemy ships flickered out, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter, a little more hopeful, as if reflecting the newfound fire within Luminara Zen's soul. Chapter 10. Echoes of Victory. The skies above the beleaguered outpost of Yerid Prime were ablaze with the fires of war. Luminara Zen stood on the command deck of the Nova cruiser, her eyes reflecting the brilliant explosions and starbursts of light that marked the battlefield. She had found the Xanthor's fatal flaw, an oversight in their flanking maneuvers that left their rear guard vulnerable. It was a slender thread of hope, but it was all they needed. Lieutenant Don Carlos stood beside her, his face set in a grim determination. "Are the squads ready?" Luminara asked, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Yes, Commander Zen," Carlos replied, his use of her formal title in this moment reflecting the gravity of their undertaking. "Alpha and Delta wings are positioned for the pincer move." Luminara nodded, her fingers dancing over the tactical display, refining their approach with precise touches. "On my mark," she said, her voice cutting through the tense hum of the cruiser's operations deck. As the Nova cruiser swooped into position, the vastness of space around them teemed with the chaos of war. Xanthor vessels, grotesque in their insectoid design, swarmed forward, their chitin hulls glinting darkly against the starlight. "Mark!" Luminara's command was the falling blade of a guillotine. Instantly, the twin fighter wings burst from their hiding spots among the debris of shattered moons and derelict ships. Like the talons of some great celestial raptor, they struck. Lasers seared through the vacuum, tearing into the exposed flanks of the Xanthor fleet. The alien ships writhed and twisted, attempting to reorient their defenses. But it was too late. Amid the unfolding chaos, a direct line opened between Luminara and the squad leaders. "Focus fire on their command ship. Disable it, and the swarm loses its queen," she instructed, her words a calm beacon in the storm. The battle raged, a ballet of destruction choreographed in the void. Each explosion was a beat in the symphony of their assault, each maneuver a note struck with precision. Luminara and Carlos watched, their fates, and the fate of Urid Prime, hanging in the balance. The turning point came when a daring maneuver by Delta Wing allowed them to slip through the Xanthor's guard and plant a series of charges along the command ship's propulsion systems. The explosion was a blooming flower of light that ripped through the enemy fleet, sending shock waves that demoralized and disrupted the insectoid attackers. With the head of the swarm incapacitated, the remaining Xanthor ships faltered, their movements becoming erratic, their attacks uncoordinated. Seizing the opportunity, the Nova cruiser and its allies pressed their advantage, harrying the disorganized foes until they retreated into the dark recesses of space from which they had come. As the last of the enemy's ships warped away, a cheer erupted from the crew of the Nova cruiser. Luminara felt a weight lift from her shoulders, the tension of the past hours giving way to a weary relief. Beside her, Carlos let out a long breath, his earlier stoicism melting into a smile. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with wonder and fatigue. Luminara turned to him, her eyes shining not just with the reflection of the stars, but with something deeper, something kindled in the heat of battle and solidified in the moment of their triumph. "Yes, we did," she agreed, allowing herself a rare smile. "Together." As the crew set about making repairs and tending to the wounded, Luminara and Carlos stepped out onto the observation deck. Below them, the once besieged outpost of Urid Prime was quiet, its skies now clear. Above, the stars beckoned with promises of peace, at least for now. The echoes of victory resonated through the cruiser, a reminder of what had been achieved and what could be lost. But for Luminara Zen, each echo was also a whisper of hope, a testament to the power of unity and the enduring resilience of those who fight not for conquest, but for survival. Chapter 11. A New Dawn. The battle had been a cacophony of light and sound, of desperate cries melded with the roar of cannons. But now, as the dust settled on the ravaged outpost, a profound silence fell. It was a silence filled with relief and sorrow, punctuated by the soft crunch of boots on debris as the crew of the Nova cruiser disembarked to aid the survivors. Luminara Sen walked among them, her eyes scanning the horizon of the wounded planet, her heart heavy yet hopeful. The sun of Citros IV was setting, casting long shadows over the land and illuminating the scars left by the Xanthor. The outpost, once a bustling hub of activity, now lay in ruins. Buildings that had stood proudly against the sky were now fractured skeletons, their structures compromised, their spirits broken. Yet, amid the destruction, there was a stirring of life. Survivors emerged from shelters, their faces etched with the tales of their ordeal, their eyes bright with the shock of survival. Luminara moved with purpose, her training taking over. She coordinated with human and alien crew members alike, distributing aid, setting up temporary shelters, and providing medical assistance. Every action she took was a step towards rebuilding, not just the physical outpost, but also the trust and camaraderie among those who had faced the horrors of the invasion together. Lieutenant Don Carlos was there too, his presence a constant source of strength. They worked in tandem, their earlier tensions dissolved in the heat of battle and transformed into a partnership built on mutual respect. As they lifted debris off a collapsed dwelling, Carlos glanced at Luminara, his eyes reflecting the fiery hues of the sunset. "You've changed," he said, not as an accusation, but as an acknowledgement of her evolution. Luminara paused, her hand still on a twisted beam. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just a soldier, but a man who had stood by her side when the galaxy seemed to crumble. "We both have," she replied. "War has a way of reshaping us, doesn't it?" Carlos nodded, and together they cleared the beam, revealing a family huddled underneath. A small child, no older than 5, stared up at them with wide, unblinking eyes. Luminara extended her hand, and as the child grasped it, something shifted within her, a deep-seated belief that despite the vastness of the universe, individual connections could anchor one to reality. As night enveloped Citros 4, lights began to flicker on within the temporary shelters. The crew gathered around a large bonfire, its flames casting a warm glow on tired but hopeful faces. Stories were shared, not just of loss but of miraculous survivals and acts of bravery. Luminara listened, occasionally adding her own voice to the chorus, feeling more a part of this crew than she ever had before. Later, as the fire died down to embers, Carlos found her looking out towards the stars. "What's out there?" he asked, following her gaze. "More worlds, more battles," she said softly. "But also more chances for peace, for making things right." He stood beside her, their shoulders touching slightly. "And where do we go from here?" he asked. Luminara turned to face him, her eyes clear and steady. "We keep flying," she said. "We keep fighting, not just against enemies, but for every chance to help, to heal, to connect. We've seen what can be torn apart. Now let's see what we can build together." As they stood there, the crew slowly joining them to gaze at the stars, Luminara felt a profound sense of purpose. The Nova Cruiser was more than a ship. It was a beacon of hope in a troubled galaxy, and she was its navigator, steering towards a future where the echoes of war might finally fade into whispers of peace. Chapter 12. Among New Stars. The battle had left its scars, on the hull of the Nova Cruiser, on the surface of the outpost, and in the hearts of those who fought. Yet in the quiet aftermath, as the stars shone defiantly against the void, there was a pervasive sense of renewal aboard the ship. The corridors of the cruiser, once echoing with the urgency of war, now resonated with voices of repair and reconstruction. In the medical bay, Luminara sat beside the large porthole, her gaze lost in the swirling nebulas and distant galaxies. Her body bore the minor bruises of battle, but her spirit carried deeper transformations. She had arrived on the Nova Cruiser as a refugee cloaked in resilience and mistrust. Now she felt anchored, not just by gravity, but by bonds forged in the fire of shared struggle. Lieutenant Don Carlos approached quietly, his footsteps soft against the metallic floor. He paused at the doorway, watching her silhouette framed against the cosmic canvas, a warrior draped in peace. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice gentle. Luminara turned, her features softening. "Please." She gestured to the space beside her. Carlos sat down, maintaining a respectful distance that their recent closeness no longer required. They shared a silence, comfortable and companionable, filled only by the distant hum of the engines and the soft pulse of the ship's life support systems. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Luminara finally spoke, nodding toward the viewport. "I used to look at the stars as markers of home, of places I could no longer return to. Now they're signs of what's possible, new beginnings." Carlos watched her profile, noting the shift in her expression when she spoke of the past compared to the future. "You've changed a lot since you came aboard. We all have, I guess. You've taught us as much as we've hopefully taught you." Luminara turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "I've learned about strength in diversity," she admitted. "About the power of compassion. It's not something my people. We didn't value vulnerability, but I see its necessity now, the strength it can bring." Carlos nodded, his gaze turning back to the stars. It's not just about survival, is it? It's about what makes the survival worthwhile. The connections, the community. He paused, looking at her directly. The relationships we build. Their eyes met, a silent acknowledgement of the shift in their own relationship, a journey from adversaries to allies, and now to something deeper. Luminara reached out, her hand lightly touching his. It was a simple gesture, yet charged with the electricity of unspoken possibilities. Carlos accepted her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. I'm glad you're here, Luminara, not just on the cruiser, but here. He gestured between them. Her smile was a rare gift, warm like a sun breaking through the clouds of a stormy season. I am where I need to be, she affirmed. They turned again to the viewport, watching as a comet streaked across the blackness, blazing a trail of light against the darkness. It felt symbolic, like a physical manifestation of their own journey. After a moment, Carlos spoke up, his voice thoughtful. What do you think about the next mission? The Council is considering sending us to the Outer Rim. There's talk of uncharted territories, possibly new allies. Luminara's gaze remained on the comet, but her mind raced ahead to new challenges and new opportunities. I think it sounds like exactly where we should be going. New stars, new worlds. Carlos squeezed her hand gently. Together, then? Together, she agreed, the word feeling like a promise and a proclamation. As the comet faded into the distance, its tail lingering like a fading memory, Luminara and Carlos continued to sit in shared silence. Around them, the Nova cruiser thrummed with life, its crew busy with preparations for the journey ahead. In that moment, though, the universe seemed to pause, giving space for new bonds to strengthen, for new dreams to take root, and for new stars to guide their way. ### Epilogue, Uncharted Horizons. As the last hues of Citros IV's sunset dissolved into the inky void, the Nova cruiser slipped silently through the vast star-littered expanse of space. Luminara Sen stood at the viewing port, her gaze fixed on the distant pinpricks of light that scattered across the cosmic canvas. Each star, a story, every gleaming planet, a testament to the endless possibilities that lay stretched out before her. The cruiser hummed with a gentle, reassuring thrum, a lullaby of peace in the aftermath of chaos. The deck beneath her feet felt more like home now, resonating with the echo of footsteps, both alien and human, that had come to symbolize her newfound fraternity. In the solitude of space, Luminara found a silence that was not empty, but full of the whispers of unity and shared destinies. Beside her, the door hissed softly open, and Lieutenant Don Carlos stepped through. His presence no longer signaled conflict or the uneasy tension of earlier days. Now he brought with him a comforting sense of companionship, his earlier formalities lost to the forge of shared battles and whispered confidences under alien moons. Quite a view, isn't it? Carlos asked, his voice a low rumble that complemented the quietude around them. Luminara nodded, her eyes still affixed to the vista beyond the glass. It makes you believe in infinite beginnings, doesn't it? Carlos joined her by the port, following her gaze into the vast unknown. Infinite beginnings, endless possibilities, he echoed thoughtfully. It's hard to believe that just weeks ago, we were at the brink, unsure if there would be a tomorrow. Yet here we are. Luminara mused, her voice a blend of wonder and resolve. Not just surviving, but moving forward, rebuilding, growing. Growing, Carlos repeated, his hand finding hers, their fingers intertwining naturally, a connection as deep and vast as the space that enveloped them. Not just out there, he said, gesturing to the stars, but in here. He placed his other hand over his heart, then over hers. Luminara smiled, feeling the warmth of his hand seep through the fabric of her uniform, reaching into the places she had long thought barricaded. How strange and beautiful it was, she pondered, that the heart could undergo such expanses of healing, spurred by the very encounters she had once deemed threats. Turning to face Carlos, she saw in his eyes a reflection of her own transformation, a blend of past shadows and present light. Do you think we'll ever get used to this? she asked, a playful tilt to her lips. I hope not, Carlos replied with a grin. Getting used to it might make us forget how precious it all is. The peace, the alliance, the unity. It's the continuous wonder that keeps us vigilant and appreciative. Luminara's gaze returned to the stars, the future a mosaic of paths untraveled and worlds unexplored. The Nova Cruiser was more than a ship now. It was a symbol of their shared voyage beyond the boundaries of old fears and into the embrace of a hopeful cosmos. As the stars beckoned, Luminara felt the ship accelerate gently, the vastness of space folding around them like the pages of an unwritten epic. Here, in the boundless theater of the universe, they were pioneers on an eternal frontier, charting courses not just through space, but through the very essence of what it meant to be alive and together. And in this unending journey, amidst the ceaseless dance of galaxies, Luminara Sen found not just her place in the galaxy, but a profound truth. That the horizon, no matter how distant, was always within reach, always uncharted, always beckoning with the light of innumerable suns.